Hello again, everyone. I'm Mark Wormsley, and I'm the founder of the Arts and Culture Network. We're a growing global community of over 160,000 now across our 8 arts and culture LinkedIn groups. I don't get to meet everyone, but when I do, it's a pleasure. And that is absolutely the case today because Colin has joined me. Colin has joined us as a full member, which is very much appreciated because we're entirely member funded as a community, and we like to donate some of that membership revenue when we can. So, Colin, thank you for joining me today.
You're welcome. Great to be here.
I've been looking forward to this. What we're going to do is I'm going to create your fantasy cultural year in a moment from the answers to 10 easy questions to which there are
Right,
no wrong answers. But before I
right.
do that, I wonder if you'd be kind enough to give us a brief hello to everyone who hasn't met you before.
Hello everyone. My name is Colin David Reese. I am an actor and theatre director. I have been an actor since, well, the first time I was on stage was in 1955 when I was 5. My parents ran a children's theatre drama school um, once a week. And then when I was 12, I was cast in a play about William Shakespeare, which was set in the inn, which is somewhere between London and Stratford, which is probably, according to some scholars, where Shakespeare stayed when he went back and forth from London to Stratford, being that would be a 2-day ride on horseback. So this inn, which is in Windsor, one can draw from that what one will,
Mhm.
and
A few merry wives around.
um, and so this play, which was musical, was created, written about one of Shakespeare's stops in in this inn, and I played his quite possibly illegitimate son, who was called William, which is an interesting name to choose for your illegitimate son if you um, and so again, some of the scholars think that this William may have been um, William's illegitimate son, and so that was when I was 12, which was my first experience of really working with professional actors. It was a tryout for the West End, but it never made it. And then when I was 17, I left school and I got a job at Plymouth Repertory Theatre, where I joined the company as what was then called an acting ASM, an assistant stage manager. Your duties as ASM were to prepare the props, maybe help with the set building, and play small parts. The director of the Plymouth Rep at that time was at the Athenaeum Theatre, was a lady called Joan Knight, who went on to run Perth. And we did, in the season were a number of plays, one of which was Romeo and Juliet, which I played several parts. And one of the actors playing Friar Lawrence was a wonderful old man whose name I now forget, being that was a long time ago. And he was 83 years old. So bear in mind, this is 1967, and he was 83 years old. And he had started his career when he was 14. So if you take the link back and do the mathematics, that goes back a long way.
Mm.
And he but I had no training at that time, or certainly no professional training. And so he took me under his wing, and he gave me, well, I sort of became his apprentice, if you like. And he gave me lots and lots of advice, based on his many years of performing, which of course was a lot of which was probably based on what he had learnt when he was 14 and he entered the profession. So I was, by the time that season finished, I was steeped in the tradition of being a performer on stage.
And was that's great. What a wonderful thing to be able to have a mentor of that kind in those circumstances. You know, any amount of university training is great, but to have somebody who's been through that process
Yeah,
was
yeah,
fantastic. So
yeah.
let's leap to the present day, if we may,
Um,
and
okay,
the
okay,
work that you're doing. It's wonderful. We'll write a profile about you that will accompany this interview,
okay,
so all the
okay,
details will be there.
okay,
But
okay.
what is your current passion and activity?
Well, people ask me, "Are you passionate about Shakespeare?" And my usual answer is no. I'm obsessed. Um, uh, Shakespearean performance is something that has guided my entire professional life, and my um, I can't remember. Sorry, what was the question?
No, sorry. Well, I think I'm keen to get onto your fantasy cultural year, but I think
Okay.
it's clear that you've had a glittering career, a glittering and long career, and that Shakespeare has been the sort of North Star of that professional process.
Absolutely,
I
absolutely. Yeah.
imagine you would, if you were on Mastermind, William Shakespeare would be your specialist subject, I guess.
Um, Possibly. Um, but
What
if
other?
well, but the trouble is when you go up against the scholars, um, they've spent 30, 40 years sitting behind a desk poring through um, things about Shakespeare,
Yeah,
not necessarily the texts themselves.
okay.
And so if it's questions directly from Shakespeare, well, I don't. I had a friend. My father had a friend called Tony Church who had performed in every single play,
Mm.
um, and as and I do not have his encyclopedic knowledge. So,
You have
um,
practical knowledge, certainly, don't you?
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
yes.
Right.
Um,
Thank you for that. That's given me some inspiration for the fantasy cultural year that I'm going to create for you. Now, I have a time machine and I have a magic wand, and both of them are in full working order for the purposes,
okay.
just to make it even more exciting and imaginary. Now, in order to start, I need to place you somewhere in the world. I might have a guess at where this might be going, but in order to place you somewhere in the world, I need to ask you, what's your favorite building?
Building
Yes. Do you have a favorite building or one that you'd love to see that haven't done yet?
that I haven't done yet.
Either. It could be one that
Uh,
you love.
um, um, well, the Alhambra in Granada. Um,
Perfect.
uh,
That's where we'll start.
uh,
Steeped in ancient history as well. Fantastic.
yes,
So
yeah,
I'd like you to imagine that you're sitting at a pavement cafe in Granada in sight of the Alhambra Palace.
okay.
It's 6 p.m. on a June evening and it's warm and sunny. And there is a drink by your side. What would we find there, Colin?
Um, a sherry called Laina.
Oh, how appropriate for that location as well.
Well, Jerez is actually not far from Granada,
Just down the
so
road,
yeah,
and
yeah,
there's that
yeah,
lovely journey you can do where the
yeah,
bulls are all on the hills, you know, the
yeah,
bull
yeah,
statues.
yeah. And
Excellent.
a nice cold Laina,
Yep.
which if you drink too many of, are probably not a terribly good idea. But they slip down so easily that you don't notice until
That's perfect. Excellent.
until you try to stand up.
Yes.
Uh,
So that's an ice cold Laina sherry. There
yes,
we go.
yeah.
Perfect. Now there's a book next to you as well. It could be your favorite book. It could be a recent discovery. It could be a book that's been with you all your life. What would we find there next to your Laina?
Well, apart from the complete works, um, there's a book called Shikasta by Doris Lessing,
Hmm.
which actually has a link to Granada in a odd way, um, because
That's perfect. What was that again? The name of the book was
Shikasta,
Shikasta
Shikasta.
by Doris Lessing.
Yes.
There we go. So now we've captured the scene. Okay, there you are in this beautiful sunlight with the book and the drink within view of the palace. Now you're feeling quite pleased with yourself because you've just come from a meeting in the palace with a wealthy Spanish family foundation who are Shakespeare fanatics. Okay. They got wind of you and your expertise and your experience, and they would like to hire you for a year, okay, at great expense, I might add, first class all the way, to travel the world and create a kind of global league table of who knows Shakespeare best around the world. Okay. So that they can then invest in education projects where his work is not quite so well known or hasn't been quite so widely translated, even. You will become the go-to expert for global Shakespeare understanding, and there'll be a TV crew will follow you. There's a book deal in it. There'll be a TED talk when you get back, and then you can do, if you wish, they would like you to do a global university lecture tour after you've got back and done this year of study. Okay, does that sound like fun?
Well, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So every
Um,
friends and family can come and visit you when you're away, and it's first class all the way. So the first thing we need to do is to decide, given that sort of research trip into the awareness and appreciation of the works of Shakespeare in different parts of the world, where would you like to start? You can go to any city in the world to start this.
um, quite possibly India.
India. Okay, that's
The
fantastic.
the Indian, certainly the educated Indians, love Shakespeare,
Yes.
and
They have their own rich tradition of epic
yes,
stories as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Okay, so we're going to go to Mumbai. Okay. You're on the plane. You turned left when you got on the plane because you're traveling first class. And the steward brings you an iced sherry. Was it Lorena or yeah,
Laina,
Laina? Okay.
la as in L.A.,
Yeah.
Ina, Ina,
Ina, Laina. So that's brought to you together with a note from the Family Foundation back in Granada. They'd like to challenge you to listen only to one very specific genre or type of music for 12 months, to the exclusion of all else. Okay. I give you a
mean
music
I can't listen to hard rock.
You can, but only hard rock.
Uh,
What genre would you choose?
that's Sorry, that is an extremely difficult question
I
because
know.
I have incredibly eclectic musical taste. And to restrict to just one type of music for a whole year.
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
I honestly don't think I can answer that.
While you're thinking,
I
Colin,
will try, yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
while you're thinking, I'm afraid your video has frozen, but we can still hear you. So it should come back in, but we'll continue anyway.
Shall I block it? Shall I turn it off and turn it on again?
If you're able to turn your video off and on again, that might trigger it to come back on. There we go. Perfect. Excellent. So have you decided an answer to this tortuous musical question?
Anyway,
If you had to, what genre would it be?
I'm trying to think what I do listen to. Well, I suppose I would have to say ultimately European classical music because the range is so vast.
Yeah, that gives you a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Which is great. Somebody
Or
rather clever.
maybe it's a bit cheating in the question, but
No, others have chosen that, which is
yeah.
fine. You can have
And
European classical music. Somebody rather cleverly said live music.
yeah, well that is cheating.
That is properly cheating, yes. Excellent. Okay. So we're we arrive in Mumbai, and a group of young Shakespeare scholars take you under their wing. They whisk you into a lovely loft apartment in the center of Mumbai, and they say, right, we're settle in, unpack. We're going to come back later and take you to a dance performance, followed by dinner. Now, this is where the
Okay.
magic wand and the time machine come in, because I can put any dance performance in front of you for a couple of hours. You don't have to remain in Indian culture. You can go back in time. You can have any dancers, living or not, any group, any style. What dance-based performance would you enjoy in those circumstances?
You do ask difficult questions. Uh, uh, because of course uh, my automatic response would be, given that we are in India, would be Indian dance, which also is incredibly vast in
Yeah.
terms of its. But I suppose if it were just for me, for relaxing, does it include long dead dancers?
Yes.
Okay, well, I suppose I would choose classical ballet.
Classical ballet.
Yeah, to be able to see Baryshnikov and Nureyev and Margot
Fontaine.
Fontaine and
Wonderful. So we're going to have a double header, and the first half is some local Indian classical dance, and the
okay,
second half is with the time machine. We're going to go back in time, and we're going to have Baryshnikov, Nureyev, Fontaine for the second half of the performance. There we go.
okay.
Now we're going out to dinner now. You're going out with your new colleagues. That Mumbai has cuisine from all over the world. What would be your preferred cuisine for dinner?
I have I have been all over the world, actually. I mean, I have been from Australia to Nigeria to Israel to, um, and I think Lebanese.
Lebanese, lovely,
Yeah,
fantastic. That's
yes.
great.
I mean, it is so inventive. It is so, it has all the Middle East. It's, I'm
That's a
I'm a great fan of Lebanese
perfect. There are
cooking.
some wonderful Lebanese restaurants in London. I know. I've
Yeah,
been to a
yeah.
few. Excellent.
Not
Now,
not a not a lot in central France where I am.
ah, unfortunately, yes. Now we're going to buzz again to another city in a different country. Where would you like to go?
Any city in the world. Well, well, certainly not in America at the moment, anywhere.
Mm.
Um, uh, I've been to Canada. I've been to Toronto, and most of the cities in Canada. Um,
It doesn't have to be a new one. You can go back to a lovely place if you wish.
Prague.
Prague. So we're
I,
off
sh
to
I shot a
Prague.
fi I shot a film in Prague,
Mm.
and um,
Perfect. So we're in Prague in the Czech Republic, standing on Charles Bridge, and it's sport day in Prague. It might be a Saturday. Now, we had breakdancing in the Olympics last year, so some sports can be considered performance art. Now, I'm going to put a sporting event in front of you, and we can use the time machine and the magic wand. But if you needed to watch some sport for a couple of hours, anything you like, what would you choose?
well, I'm a great tennis fan because I played a lot of tennis when I was a kid. But one of the sports that I admire the most is competitive ice skating because the technique, um, to for me, anything which requires a technique which has been utterly mastered.
Yeah, 10,000
Um,
hours, they say, don't they?
yeah, yeah,
10,000 hours.
yeah, and
Okay, so the World Championships of ice dance and ice skating just happen to be happening in Prague while you're there.
right,
So
which
that's
is
great.
not unreasonable to
Not
assume.
unreasonable. Now let's buzz again to another city, anywhere in the world.
Um, well, I've never been to South America,
Okay, so Buenos
and
Aires or Rio?
my late my late companion was from BA, so and she was always trying to persuade me to go there, but I could never really afford it, even though, of course, she had family there, and I would have had no accommodation problems.
Mm,
But she we watched a lot of Argentinian films,
okay.
which
So
are
let's buzz to Buenos Aires on the plane again. Now, when we get there, we realize that in Buenos Aires there is a new digitally enhanced art gallery in our fantasy world that allows you to put on a pair of virtual reality glasses and step into the work of a famous artist, any famous artist. It becomes three-dimensional. It's 360 degrees. It's animated. There might be sound. So in those circumstances, which famous artist's work would you like to step into?
um, well, I'm a great fan of the pre-Raphaelites.
Excellent. Titian and the like.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, you managed to do that. You can walk around. Let's show our colleagues some Titian. Where are we? I'm just going to pull some up. Titian, Italian painter. There we go. Images. Right, here is some. So we can choose. You can choose one of these pictures. There we go. Our colleagues can see this now. Yes, wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to walk around some of these? These are incredible, aren't they?
I didn't bring my glasses into here.
Don't worry. That was just to give everybody a bit of a taster. So good.
Right,
Excellent. So we're going to, I'm going to whisk you back to London now. Okay.
right.
And you and I are going out every night of the week to do something artistic and cultural together. On Monday, we're going to go back in time to a musical performance of your choice, one that you've loved and would love to experience again. Tuesday, we're going to the theatre, and I think I know where that we'll end up
Hmm.
at the Globe. Wednesday is a Broadway or West End musical. Thursday is the opera, and Friday is the movies. And between us, we can choose what we go to see. So,
Okay.
is there a concert or a musical performance that you attended that you would love to use the time machine to go back to and experience it again?
Yes, Mozart's in no, not the Requiem, the Mass in D minor, I think it is.
Yep. That
Um,
where was? Do you remember where that was?
oh, I've watched it several times. Um,
Perfect.
I have a Deutsche Grammophon recording with Herbert von Karajan
Mm,
conducting and some incredible
soloists.
so
Yeah.
yes. Um,
That's a great choice. That will be fantastic. Just to see von Karajan conduct again would be
yeah.
fantastic. Now this is going to be a difficult one for you because we're going to go to the Globe Theatre,
Which globe?
Shakespeare's Globe.
No, I mean the one now or the one in
Ooh,
then.
the one then.
Oh, okay,
Okay.
okay.
So which play are we going to see back as it was first performed?
Measure for measure.
Measure for Measure. Great choice. Fantastic. Would that be your favorite play?
It would,
Yeah,
yes.
fantastic.
Um, it is. Um, he covers so much of human frailties, um, exploitation. Yeah, I mean, and Angelo as a character is one of the most rounded characters that he created because he is I mean what he does is so evil
Mm,
and yet he's a good man
mm. I
and he
read that from.
as a good man he finds himself being entrapped. I mean he says what's this is this her fault or mine?
Mm,
um and and the way his power corrupts, he hates himself for being corrupted, and yet he
mm,
can't stop himself.
mm,
And so this is such a, it is such a, um, an incredible look into humans,
mm,
how human frailty. Um, and you know they say power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely,
mm,
and that is exactly what happens. But he never loses sight of the fact that he is doing things which are against his nature.
mm. Fascinating. I'm going to have to revisit that one. Excellent. So that's Measure for Measure at the Globe back in the 16th century, I imagine, or slightly.
Measure for Measure is, yes, late. I can't remember if it's late 16th or early 17th. It's certainly, yeah.
Excellent. Now on Wednesday we're going to a musical. What musical would you like to go to?
Cabaret
Cabaret. Great choice.
with Liza Minnelli
Yes, with Liza Minnelli.
on
Um,
stage. I met her once.
did you?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I was working in a bar and she came in and she was going with Peter Sellers.
Mm.
I lost it completely. I became a total vegetable.
Fantastic. Now, Thursday is opera night. Are you an opera fan, Colin?
I am.
Is there a particular opera we'd like to see at the Opera House?
Um, I think it will probably be Verdi and it will probably be Nabucco.
Lovely. Verdi's Nabucco. And film night is Friday. What we're going to go to the IMAX, the big surround cinema with wonderful sound. What movie would we be watching together?
Yeah, I'd like to go and watch The Matrix again. The
Wow.
Matrix blew me away. It exists on so many levels. I don't think, I kind of don't think they were aware of quite how many levels they were working on,
Mm,
because it includes most of Eastern philosophy. What is reality?
mm,
We are living in a world. Are we living in reality, or are we living in something which is the product of our imagination? And that is something that runs through Eastern philosophy a lot.
mm. Well, we'll
Um,
see. We'll have the whole day there. We'll do the trilogy. There we go.
Less because I saw Matrix 2 and I thought, yeah, they've kind of lost it.
And the main one, the first one.
Yeah, they didn't really understand what. Um, I remember seeing The Matrix the first time in Bucharest. Because I was shooting a film there, and there weren't a lot of people in the cinema, and I had an afternoon where I wasn't shooting, so an afternoon off. So so I went, and I was just for most of the film, I was just
Yeah. I mean,
um,
when will that have been? Would that have been in the 90s or the first
uh,
came out? Probably.
very early 2000s, I think,
Right.
because I shot that film in 2000,
Yeah.
10
Well,
years after the fall of Ceausescu, which was
mm,
yeah. Uh,
fantastic. Well, that's our week done. Now, before I send you off to travel the world further and do all of this wonderful research and then come back and do a TED talk, a TV show, the book deal, the university lecture tour, I'm going to give you what I call the hero lunch. We're in London. We're in one of those wonderful Lebanese restaurants in London. I'm going to give you a 2 hour leisurely lunch, and you can invite one person to come, and they will come. It could be somebody who's famous or otherwise, living or not. So it could be a historical figure, and they will come. So in those circumstances, who would you like to invite?
um, alive or dead?
Alive or dead?
Um, well, my first reaction would be my partner who died in 2020, but uh, that would perhaps be less interesting for your
It's
for
entirely up to you because there is a
um,
supplementary question to this.
okay. Um, Leonard Cohen.
Leonard Cohen. Your partner can come too, by the way.
Okay.
Now, as a slight twist,
Well, she was a great fan as well. So
okay, so in a slight twist to this, she may have invited him as well, but who do you think Leonard Cohen would invite?
Marianne.
There we go. Was that his, is that a significant person for him?
It's the love of his life.
Fantastic. I
You
don't know
you're
his.
not familiar.
I'm
I
not
mean,
familiar.
one of the very first songs that he hit with back in the 1960s when I was young,
Mm,
very young, well, 17, 16, 17, um, was So Long Marianne, which
mm,
was dedicated to her. And
fantastic.
she was his muse. She was his, I think Adam, his son, I think is his daughter, her daughter.
Mm,
Um, no, well, his daughter. Whatever. No,
mm.
well, their daughter.
Their daughter, yes. Well,
It
there we go.
takes two to
Colin,
make a baby.
yes, it does. Colin, thank you so much for doing this. It's been a real pleasure. Have you enjoyed your fantasy cultural year?
Yes, and
So, with some
oh
tough
dear,
questions.
maybe I would love to live it.
Yes. So thank
Um,
you again for being one of our full members. Wherever this appears on YouTube, SoundCloud, and Spotify, there'll be a profile about you, and on our website, of course, and then plastered all over our LinkedIn group for a while. Please don't rush off. But for the time being, thank you so much for being a good sport and doing this. I hope it wasn't as onerous as you feared it might be.
mm, some of the questions were difficult to answer. Let's just put it that way.
Well, you did a marvelous job. Thank you so much, Colin.
Okay.